This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Brett Young. Change the game with BY7204LL, Brett Young's newest canola hybrid with Liberty Link technology.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
And welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Monday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. We had fantastic podcast streams and downloads last week. Keep it up. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, anybody that's interested in agriculture, tell them about this show. And it's great to have all of our new listeners aboard. Fantastic numbers from last week. Okay, today we're broadcasting from the Calgary airport. Yes, why not? Headed to Ottawa for a meeting on Tuesday. So before we hop on a flight, doing the show here from the airport. So hopefully there's not too much background noise. Today on the show, it's Agronomic Monday. We'll be joined by Peter P. Johnson. We'll be joined by Jeremy Boychyn as well from Alberta Grains. And we've also got a product spotlight, an economic spotlight, coming up with Karl Wyant. He is the head agronomist with Nutrien. So looking forward to that as well. If you have any feedback on today's program, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms. You're also more than welcome to call the Real Ag feedback line. That number is 855-776-6147. Last week, we talked a lot about the issue with China and the fact that China was going to have an investigation into anti-dumping allegations against Canadian canola. There is details out today that Kelvin Hepner has wrote about at realagriculture.com. The Chinese government shared more details as it formally started its anti-dumping investigation into canola from Canada on Monday. China's Ministry of Commerce says the investigation, which was announced days after the Trudeau government unveiled steep tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, steel, and aluminum, is expected to take up to 1 year with a September 9th, 2025 deadline. Now, this is very similar to what we heard last week from the China Institute at the University of Alberta when we interviewed the director. As with China's anti-dumping probe into barley from Australia, the timeline for decision on sanctions or tariffs could be extended by another 6 months in special circumstances. Now, in the Australian barley case, the Chinese government took nearly 18 months to investigate before imposing an 80% tariff on Aussie barley. Chuck Penner talked about this last week on the program. So continue to follow it very closely at realagriculture.com. China's put out a deadline. They're going to take a year to do this investigation. Again, an internal investigation, not through the WTO. Disadvantage Canada indeed. We'll keep you updated as this story develops. Let's get back to the agronomy. When we come back, we'll be joined by Jeremy Boychyn of Alberta Grains. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
At Vaterstad, we aim to be the world's leading partner for outstanding emergence. We're doing that through innovative tillage, planting, and seeding equipment that's optimized for your field conditions and soil types. We also offer industry-leading capacities to help you get the job done in shorter windows of time. It's all designed to give your crop the best start possible so you can maximize yields. Vaterstad, we look forward to growing together.
The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to get your crop off to a great start and a strong finish. Whether you're growing chickpeas, fava beans, lentils, or peas, you'll get all the latest and best agronomic information at PulseSchool.com. A library of top-notch agronomy videos from industry experts available on demand at your fingertips. Visit the Pulse School, brought to you by BASF on RealAgriculture.com.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Glide delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety. Enhanced weed control. And a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGly.ca.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Monday. Of course, today we're focused on agronomy. Joining us right now is the Director of Agronomy, Research, and Extension with Alberta Grains. It is Jeremy Boychyn. Jeremy, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Shaun. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Hey, we haven't chatted for a while. How's your summer?
It's been going pretty good. It's been busy. A lot of action happening at Alberta Grains, and it's been keeping me on my toes, and some new staff we have. So it's been an exciting year for us, and yeah, it's good to come back and chat with you again, Shaun.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, harvest underway. I don't know, man. It just you're talking to a lot of growers, so I'm interested in what you've been hearing, because I continue to hear anecdotally. My expectation was here, and it was even a knockdown expectation from where I was, but it's where my expectation was versus what I'm seeing on the yield monitor. I'm not exactly ecstatic.
Yeah, and it's interesting because every year's a little bit different how we start to hear how harvest is rolling in, and I think you and I are the same, that we try and reserve our feelings and how we actually express how yield's going to be until we actually see the numbers. And in those good years, it's like, wow, we're hearing some good numbers. We're not hearing too many bad numbers. And this year, I'm hearing more on the lower side than I'm hearing on the higher side. But I haven't seen any actual, hard numbers or averages across regions for me to say, hey, we're sitting much lower, we're sitting much higher. It's just anecdotally, those numbers are coming in and they're not looking great. Not terrible, but not where we hoped they would be, considering the year that we started with and the moisture we started with in the spring.
Yeah. And I know you focus on the cereals, but I was in Kalmar, Alberta yesterday around Edmonton, and there's some massive canola swaths. And so right away my brain went to like, oh boy, there's a good crop. But then like that second check of, I wonder if there's a lot of volume, but not a lot of seed in the pod, which can be possible too, because I've heard that from a few growers as well. One of the results on the grain side that I've been hearing from a lot of growers is thin kernels, that we just didn't get that plump set with some of the heat that we had at the back end of the growing season.
Yeah, and I was looking at some of the rainfall distribution across different parts of Alberta, and Edmonton is one of those ones that looked a little bit better. Now, obviously, it's patchy depending on whether you got that inch rainfall or those 2 inches that came through overnight.
Yeah.
But distribution was a little bit more even across those months of summer, right? It looked a little bit, or if you go to somewhere like Brooks, oh my goodness, everything came in May, and June and July just kind of dropped right off, right? Where if you look at Edmonton, it's a little bit more distributed. So that's why I'm hoping as we move through this harvest, we start to see those stronger numbers coming from those more northerly regions. But we'll see. Yeah, those thin kernels, kind of thinking about how we received rainfall this year, and why we're seeing those thin kernels, and the timing of stress and its impact on what we actually see in the combine, in the bin. I don't think I have to kind of reiterate too hard. It's like we had a good spring. We had good moisture in May and through most of June. Near the latter end of June, we really saw a decrease, and into July, a decrease of moisture. And August was relatively dry in most areas. And I think what we saw was good germinations. We had great plant stands. Things were looking good. We had good tillering because we continued to see that moisture, which means we had good kind of kernel set and spike set. That happens very early in the season at the beginning of tillering. We set the number of kernels, we set the number of spikes, we set that yield potential very early. That's why it's great to get good establishment, good moisture, good fertility early in the season, because it sets that yield potential high, right? And then, we continued to see some moisture, and I think there was enough moisture there to get us into flowering. Now, we got a bit of heat, and I think there's probably going to be some areas that saw a little bit more stress around flowering than others. But I think in general, we had enough moisture in the soil to get good pollination and good seed set there. But where I think we started to suffer was after that. And that's why we're seeing those smaller kernels, those thin kernels, because they established, but then they weren't able to fill because that drier part of the season. So, we're seeing those shriveled, kind of ugly looking kernels in some of those drier parts of the province. And it's so heartbreaking because you see it and you're like, gosh, if that was, with barley, if it was 50 bushels instead of 42, what a difference that would make.
Oh, huge difference.
That's a huge amount of yield loss. That's just, it's not the amount of kernels. It is really the size that's causing that impact.
Well, and one of the things we got to think about too is it relates to, jumping ahead to 2025. If you do intend to save any of your seed and you get it cleaned, make sure you're doing 1,000 kernel weight test, because you may be very led astray by some of those older traditional calculations on seed rate.
Yeah, it's, when I first see that, that's the first thing my head goes to. It's like, okay, if this is going to seed, what are we looking at in terms of seed quality? Is this thinner kernel? Is the vigor low? Should we be managing how and when we're putting this seed in? Is there a potential germination risk? And obviously the first thing you want to do is, bag that distributed sample and send it in to get it tested. Make sure you know what you're dealing with. And, I think I threw those numbers out of 42 versus 50 pounds per bushel. That's a 20% difference in seeding rate.
Yeah.
So you're talking about how much seed am I actually having to store and keep? How much am I pushing towards seeding versus potentially selling? So it does impact your management decisions of that seed, of storage. So make sure you're getting those seed tests done. Do your calculations on how much you plan on using, because it is going to affect that. But also, apart from that, if you're not, then you're potentially overseeding how much you actually need to put down, right? Because if it is good germination, if it is good vigor, even though it's thin, and you're putting down 20% more than you need to, we want to make sure we always push high seeding rates. Make sure you're pushing high seeding rates, but there is that plateau. So we don't want to be putting down more seed than we need to. So knowing what you're working with is going to help you make sure you're setting yourself right.
And even if you're buying certified seed, you got to ask that same question to your local seed dealer and say, hey, what's 1,000 kernel weight on this, right? And I know, hey, I sold seed for a living. So I have been in many of these conversations where you have, those big, huge plump kernels. You're like, no, you got to buy more. You're not going to have enough seed. Oh, you're just trying to sell me more seed. Well, this is the reverse of that. This is where you don't need that much seed. I'm not going to go that light. There's no way. You're crazy. I need more. It's just funny how it works in the mind works in both ways, considering what we are used to. Hey, one of the other things that you and I were talking about during the commercial break, you've noticed it. I have seen it because I drove from Lethbridge to Edmonton on the weekend. That's some of the spreading of the straw on the combine. It's I don't know how to describe it, but it could be better in some instances. What have you been seeing?
Yeah, when I'm driving across the province, Shaun, this is like, there's two things that really get me squirming in my seat. One is when I see wild oats poking above the canopy. Gosh, I hate seeing that. And the other thing is when I see not great distribution of straw and chaff at harvest. And the reason that gets me going is because we spend so much time and effort making sure, we just talked about it, the right amount of seed going into the ground, the right seed timing. We make sure we're putting down the right fertility, we're doing new variety, all of these things, and even variable rate to make sure we're making the most of each square foot of that field. And then when we don't have good distribution of straw and chaff, what happens is we're creating variability across the field that we can control, right? This is a controllable thing that if we're not controlling, we're impacting the emergence of our crop, the variability of our crop, which could impact the quality of our crop, which it cascades down the line. And if we can take a minute when we're changing varieties or changing fields or changing crops, to take a look and ask the question of, am I getting that distribution across the width of my header? Is it even distribution? Is the wind impacting how that's moving across? Because if not, then we want to stop and ask, okay, how can I make this adjustment? And maybe it is a quick adjustment on the go, and maybe it's a bigger question of, are my knives sharp enough, and am I working with the right piece of equipment for the capacities that I need? That can set us up for success for the following crop. And cereals create a massive amount of residue, and if we're not managing it appropriately, it can be a great challenge.
Yeah, do I have the right gear? Right, that's a piece of this discussion. And right now the U.S. Open's on, right? And in tennis there's unforced errors, and this to me is one of those unforced errors, because Mother Nature throws us so many variables through the growing season, and we talk about it. Yeah, well, I have no control of the weather. Well, you don't. This is something you have a control over. This is you. And let's just quickly review. If you don't get that good spread across the width of the header, what problems persist as we head into next season?
Yeah, well, there's going to be a couple things that are probably going to come right away in the spring. Is potential uneven moisture, right? So some moisture is being captured because we have more residue here than over there, which then in turn, when you're seeding, which depending on your seeding equipment, can lead to seeding challenges. You get straw caught up in your seeder, or you get hair pinning. So you could have uneven distribution of seeds. And then after that, if you do have uneven distribution of moisture, then you're talking about germination changes across the field that can impact the timing between germination across your field. And then when we talk about, okay, we want to make the most of each input we're putting on the field and crop. If you're spraying your herbicide, if you're spraying a fungicide, if you're not getting that ideal timing, and there is ideal timings, then the value of that application goes down, or the value on this part of the crop is different than this part of the crop. And again, we're working to keep things as even as possible so we can maximize value in those efforts that we take on those inputs that we put down. But if we're again, like you said, unforced errors, creating variability, we're lowering the value we get from those actions. And then, following that into harvest, if there is that much variability in your crop, could be impacting your quality, could be getting greens in there. If you're seeking malt, it could be impacting your malt quality or whether you get accepted for malt. So it does really cascade the whole way across.
Okay, let's finish up with stripe rust quickly. We definitely heard more about it this season in Canada for sure, coming out of the U.S. Genetics play a role here in our defense. Talk about what we need to think about.
Yeah, so we saw some stripe rust coming up from the U.S. this year. In southern and central Alberta, we saw the fields popping up and spraying occurring. And one of the things to think about is actual variety selection when it comes to this. And that seems obvious. We're selecting varieties for resistance, and we're selecting, or we're planning our fungicide application when we do see this in the field specifically, and more importantly, when we do have less resistant varieties. But what's important to think about here is what is the actual age and novelty of the variety that you're using. Because if you're using a variety that's maybe 15 years old, the genetics that are at play for resistance may be that they're no longer carrying the same level of resistance to the race that's present and coming from the US. Because the races that come up from the US and land in Canada, that's dependent on which varieties they're selecting. So their crop management decisions are impacting how we have to manage stripe rust in Alberta. So using those more novel varieties will allow you to be more on top of the genetics that are going to have potentially more resistance, or the expected level of resistance that variety was bred for. So if you are using an older variety, you have to be more cautious if we're seeing stripe rust come up, because it may not be carrying the same level of resistance as what you originally purchased it as.
Great points. Hey, Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us. We got to have you back soon, okay, bud?
Thanks for having me, Shaun.
Hey, appreciate it. That is Jeremy Boychyn with Alberta Grains, and Alberta Grains is also one of our sponsors of our Wheat School, along with C&M Seeds and Syngenta Canada. You can find those episodes by going to wheatschool.com or check out the Real Agriculture YouTube channel. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio with more of Agronomic Monday right after this.
If you have a growing list of questions about getting more from your fields, know that Koch Agronomic Services has an answer for every acre. With a full spectrum of nutrient management, nutrient protection, and seed enhancement options, Koch Agronomic Services offers a deep portfolio of agronomically effective products, each designed to enhance yield potential, all available to help solve your problems. Find the answer that's right for your acres. Start by visiting kochag.ca. That's KOCH ag.ca.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Since 2010, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has been helping farmers to grow great wheat. Covering everything from markets, the latest research, pest and disease control, all the way down to on-farm trials, the Wheat School has everything your crop needs. Check out our massive video library on YouTube and grow great wheat with the Wheat School, brought to you by Syngenta Canada, C&M Seeds, and Alberta Grains.
It's now time for a product spotlight here on RealAg Radio. And we're talking eKonomics here with Nutrien. We're joined right now by the Director of Agronomy with Nutrien. It is Dr. Karl Wyant. Hey, Karl, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to chat with you again. So, okay, now we're into harvest, and we got to start to think ahead to next year already. So as farmers wrap up harvest this year in 24, what should they be thinking about to prepare for that 25 season?
One thing to think about is checking the bank account. And I don't just mean the financial bank account, really looking at what's in the soil, at the end of your harvest, especially if your crop overperformed or underperformed your yield expectations this year. Taking that soil test and checking the soil checking account can really give you some key insights on what nutrients you need to invest in next year and help you optimize those fertilizer dollars that will be coming from that real bank account.
Yeah, and I don't know about your bank account, but mine depletes, and you need to make sure you're refreshing it. So harvest removes a lot of nutrients from the soil. When should farmers be soil testing to get that accurate look at the nutrients they're going to need to add back to the soil to refresh that bank account, so to speak?
That's right. When we are taking a crop off the field, we are removing nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, and sulfur with it. For example, a 40 bushel an acre canola crop will take off between 80 and 100 units of nitrogen. That's pounds per acre, 30 pounds of phosphate, 20 pounds of potassium, and around 15 to 20 pounds of sulfur. So, you add these up over the years, and that can stack up pretty quick to some, depleting checking accounts like you mentioned. And so the piece that's so important is really to align your, real-time yield expectations and the results you have from the combine and the yield monitor and say, okay, on this field, on average, I took this much off. And you can use these crop nutrient removal calculators. We have one available at Nutrien-eKonomics.com. That's available for free. You can type your yield in and actually get yourself a fairly good estimate on what you took off. So you can make that plan coming into 2025 of what nutrients you need to put back and what you need to prioritize on your spend to maintain soil fertility.
Yeah. And what's the science of doing that test as close to the freeze up as possible?
That's right. There's some economics and some labor involved there. If you wait too long, your soil's going to freeze and it's like pounding concrete, which I wouldn't wish that on anybody. It's not very fun. So if you can do your harvest, make sure all your harvest is in order and everyone's home and happy, then just go out and grab those soil samples before the frost comes in. And that gives you some advantages, that fall soil sampling, because you have an open field. You're under way less pressure in the field to go do stuff relative to the spring because you've got winter ahead of you. And so that could be a nice advantage because you've got some time on your hands and time to plan, time to react to what that soil sample's saying. One challenge is that with those nutrients, especially the ones that move, like nitrogen, sometimes potassium could move on you, given how much, if you have a lot of snow melt or rainfall during the wintertime. So that could be a challenge, but really, I think with time on your side, you can plan. And then if you have a really challenging winter precipitation-wise, you can always go back and kind of top up and look at your nitrogen and potassium level, more immediate to when the crop's going to go in.
So I know it's only fall, but why do farmers need to plan ahead? Think about their spring starter fertilizers at this time of the year. Why is that?
So the phosphate, which is what typically a starter fertilizer has in it, the highest analysis, so typically high analysis phosphate fertilizers. The phosphate's not going to move a whole lot on you from fall to spring. So getting a fall soil sample and seeing, hey, do my soils need phosphate? That's the number one reason to justify the use of a starter fertilizer. You can get that information now. So then you can use those winter months to start saying, well, what is the best starter fertilizer for me? Is it just a formulation with phosphate in it? Or is my soil sample telling me I need other things? I need a little bit of potassium. I maybe need a micronutrient package. So you can go to your ag retailer and match the need for the starter fertilizer with a specific formulation that best matches your soil sample.
And is the benefit of the starter fertilizer just to get that launch out of the ground?
Yeah, if you think about growing a crop, especially in a place with a short growing season, you're trying to run that horse right out of the gate as quickly as you can. And so if you provide that starter fertilizer, near the seed, and you can get that crop the nutrients it needs right out of the gate and get it up, get that seed emerged, and get your plant growing as quickly as possible.
Sort of like an athlete taking pre-workout. You want to get off to a quick start.
Yeah, the Olympics just happened. Probably a lot of pre-workout going around there in Paris. Maybe just really fancy coffee. But yeah, you want to get out of that gate so you can start running your race and have a good result at the end of the season.
Makes sense. Hey, Karl, thanks so much for joining us here today on RealAg Radio for this eKonomics Product Spotlight.
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Hey, we'll be right back on RealAg Radio right after this.
Whether you're in a career within an organization, starting your own business, looking for your dream job, running your own farm operation, operating a company in ag or food, or want to hone your overall life skills, this conference is for you. Celebrating over 10 years of bringing women in ag together, join the Advancing Women Conference in Niagara Falls on November 17th, 18th, and 19th. Visit advancingwomenconference.ca for more information and to register.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday. Hey, experience the most efficient system for delivering sulfur and phosphate to meet your crop's needs with Smart Nutrition MAP plus MST. We're joined right now by Pete Johnson. Hey, Pete, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going awesome. Thanks, Shaun. It's another Monday. We're starting to get at harvest. It's very close. it's been kind of catchy weather over the weekend, but the forecast is good starting tomorrow. So hopefully but looks like the outdoor farm show will have some pretty good weather, at least Tuesday, Wednesday, probably Thursday. So good time to get out and check out what's going on at the farm show.
Yeah. What do you think you're mostly going to hear from growers? What's going to be kind of the sentiment, do you think?
So I think growers are a bit, what's the right term? They're neither extremely positive nor extremely negative.
Yeah.
It looks, right? So they're kind of average, if you will. And it depends a little bit. There are some outstanding soybeans out there. There really are some good soybeans, but the vast majority of acres got either too much rain or too little rain. It's kind of interesting. And until you get to the Ottawa Valley from a soybean perspective, just apparently, they are expecting some counties that will average over 60 bushels per acre in Eastern Ontario. That's pretty outstanding for a county average, right? We're not talking about one grower average. This is the whole county, and for those are good soybeans.
Well, I'll tell you what, Pete, one of the things I am concerned about, you and I were chatting about it during the commercial break here, and I've been hearing about it from some growers asking questions. It is tar spot. A lot of concern out in the countryside across Ontario in concerns to this. Give us an update. How severe is it in some pockets? And most importantly, what do I do about it?
So, Shaun, first off, it's almost for sure too late to do anything about it now. So let's start there. I had a conversation with a grower last week. He'd already sprayed for the second time, and the corn was fully dented. If you see any dent on the cob at all, then the chances of getting an economic response to a second fungicide application are really slim. I talked with Albert Tenuta. Albert Tenuta said, good grief, Peter. Last year when corn was $8 a bushel, we couldn't make a second application pay. This year when it's $5 a bushel, how do we expect to get there? But the problem is, Shaun, that it really has come back in with a vengeance. And you have to check every field. There are differences showing up in the different fungicides that we use. There are some that are definitely showing better than others. There's also differences in regions. And this comes back to the way that tar spot infects. And the more days you have with 7 hours of leaf wetness, the more tar spot you are going to have. When you spray that fungicide, almost in the bad area, so kind of once you get south of Exeter, we know that tar spot is a big threat. There's very few acres that did not get a VT fungicide, right? That green silk fungicide, it does double duty, both gibberella control and tar spot control. But a lot of growers just thought, well, I'm one and done, and normally that's the case. But in certain areas, so you get 14 days, basically, control out of that fungicide. And if you have really high pressure and you perhaps used one of the fungicides that isn't as good as the very best fungicides, and even if you use the very best fungicide, because some growers did, and by 3 weeks after that first fungicide application, they were already starting to see new tar spot infections.
Wow.
But it's because that every day we got 7 hours of leaf wetness. The temperatures were ideal. Tar spot doesn't like it super hot. We weren't getting super hot temperatures. So it was sort of, the inoculum was there, the host was there, the weather conditions were perfect. So there were a few growers that did a second application kind of 3 weeks after the first application, or, maybe 25 days after that first application. And we're really keen to see whether or not that second application pays when you time it appropriately. But to go in and spray now, the chances, because we're 20 days, right? Basically 20 days away from black layer. And it depends on when the corn was planted. I mean, gosh, if you planted corn June the 18th and you only sprayed your VT fungicide on the 20th of August, this whole story changes, and you should go look to see if you need another fungicide to control tar spot. I actually scouted a field on Friday that was late planted, but the fungicide was holding it really well. So we aren't going to spray that field twice. But anything planted timely, you're 20 days away from maturity. The chances of getting enough control to pay back, almost zero. Almost zero.
You're wasting your money.
Yeah, it's sort of like closing the barn door after the horse is already gone, so to speak.
Yeah, good thoughts there. You know what's really bad? You know what's really bad is the wasps this year. I got stung yesterday, Pete. Awful.
Yeah. That is no fun, right? Like, man, they hurt when they sting. And the other thing about them is that, remember that when they sting you, they release a pheromone that attracts other wasps to come to the fight and sting you some more. So hopefully you only got one sting and didn't get multiple stings, but they are social insects. That does happen. And it really comes back to the number of aphids you had. I mean, that's not the only thing, but the more food source you have, the more wasps you're going to get. And when you get a lot of aphids, they excrete sugar. When an aphid feeds on the plant, it's really interesting. They are protein deficient. They are nitrogen deficient. And so they take in way more sugar than they need. So they poop the sugar out and just kind of balance their diet by excreting the extra sugar. Wasps love that stuff. And so when you get lots of food source, I mean, it's not the only food source, but it is related. And so, you get lots of food source, you get lots of wasps, you can get stung, and that is no fun.
Yeah, they are brutal this year.
Yeah.
Hey, I know, another sorry, go ahead.
No, I just was going to say, before we leave that then, right, getting lots of questions about aphids and barley yellow dwarf virus in winter cereals here in Ontario. And so I had a question from Clark. He said, shoot, we planted the winter barley. We forgot to put the insecticide seed treatment on. We treated it, but only with a fungicide. Can I control the aphids with foliar sprays? And the answer to that is almost for sure no. And the reason is that once the aphid feeds, the plant is infected. And so you essentially have to spray repeatedly to keep the aphids at low levels. When we put it on the seed, it is systemic in the plant, and it stays in that plant for probably 6 weeks. So as soon as the aphid feeds, it's dead. And it might infect that plant, but it doesn't get to spread it from plant to plant to plant. Any of the foliar sprays we use, they pretty much knock down the aphids, and they don't translocate well in the plant so that we get that longevity of protection. And you spray today and you got to spray 7 days later, and you get rained out and you don't get in for 12 days, and all of a sudden you've got a bunch of infection because the aphids have had time to feed. So if you're planting on your Go Crops, it is now gocrops.ca. Look at the cereal information, look at your optimum date for winter wheat planting. If you are 2 weeks ahead of that with either winter barley or triticale or rye or winter wheat, then you need to use a seed insecticide to stop the aphids. Once you get to the optimum planting date, almost always frost takes the aphids out before we get into a problem with them spreading barley yellow dwarf. So it's the growers that are pushing high yields, high production, get that crop in early, give it the big bang for the buck. Yeah, they're the ones that really got to pay attention from an aphid standpoint.
You had a question from AJ, who farms in Kansas. What was his question?
Well, actually, it wasn't a question. I talk to AJ once in a while. He's great for giving me some feedback. I talked to him with questions around production, but this time, because he knows I love information, right? Wheat Pete wants test plot information. So what he did was he sent me a picture of his corn nitrogen trial.
Oh, yeah.
Ever cool. It goes from no nitrogen all the way up to, I got to remember now, it was 210, 240, 270, 270 pounds of nitrogen. And what a story that picture told. I mean, it isn't harvested yet. So we don't know for sure, but when you looked at the cob size, it just, every 30 pounds, he had a treatment. So it was 30, 60, 90, 120, all the way up to 270 pounds.
Wow.
And it just was almost a straight line cob size response, which likely relates to yield right up till 210 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And then from there, it just leveled off. 100%, Shaun, just leveled off. And so we'll wait for the yield data, but ever cool to kind of look at that. And by the way, lots of discussion in Ontario about nitrogen as well, because we are seeing a lot of corn crops go nitrogen deficient. Last year, you and I would have talked, and I would have said, upfront nitrogen was the winner this year, because if you side dressed and didn't get it into moisture, we were dry until late June, early July, and growers that side dress sometimes paid a penalty because the nitrogen didn't get there early enough. This year's the exact opposite. All upfront nitrogen, lots of moisture, lots of denitrification. So even protected nitrogen all upfront, we are seeing corn go deficient. And that isn't what we want to see, right?
Well, hey, again, last year's result is not this year's plan, right?
Yeah.
That's the beauty of this game, is every year is so different, and there's similarities, but of course it can really throw you sideways. We also had a comment from Noah from Australia. Now we're going out and about. What did Noah have to say?
So Noah is a fairly large grower under irrigation in Australia, and he reached out to me just to say that he had found RealAg on the web and the RealAg Wheat School, and he found Wheat Pete and some of those videos in Wheat School. And so in Australia, under irrigation, he had started to use some of the things we talked about in those Wheat School videos. And he, like this year, his best wheat yield ever. And he attributes at least some of that to some of the management things that we talk about on Wheat School. So it's really cool, because those agronomic principles apply everywhere. But again, you have to listen to what the principle is and then say, am I in a drought climate? Am I in a high moisture environment? Like how do I apply those principles? He's been able to apply some of those principles and make money out of it. So really cool from a RealAg standpoint.
Well, yeah, it's great to have an audience in Australia. We'll take it. Hey, Noah, tell all your friends, right? Tell your neighbors about Real Agriculture, the Wheat School, and RealAg Radio here, which, of course, you can listen to via podcast. They don't have Sirius XM in Australia, so he's got to listen to the podcast. Hey, important notice for grain farmers. The Canadian Grain Commission has revoked the licenses of Purely Canada Foods Corp. If this company owes you money for grain deliveries, you can call 1-800-853-6705 immediately. This is a message from the Government of Canada. Hey, we're going to take a quick break. We'll finish up Agronomic Monday with Peter Pete Johnson. We come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
Apply anhydrous ammonia and protect your application earlier than normal this fall. Defend against potential losses and protect your bottom line with Centuro Nitrogen Stabilizer. Patented active ingredient pronitridine offers agronomically effective protection where it matters most, below ground. Easy to handle Centuro is also non-corrosive for fewer worries about downtime or equipment damage. Start early with Centuro as part of your nitrogen management plan. Contact your local retailer or visit centuro.ca for more information today.
RealAg Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the RealAg Issues panel with Kelvin Hepner and Lindsay Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern. And don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. And we're back here on Agronomic Monday on RealAg Radio. We're covering a whole bunch of agronomic topics impacting your farms. Hey, this segment's brought to you by FP Genetics Fall Rye. Innovative seed genetics for Canadian farmers. Contact your local FP territory manager, discuss your fall seed strategy, and discover hybrid, fall rise, flexible end uses for marketing, milling, distilling, ethanol, and feed. Visit hybridfallrye.ca to learn more. And like I said, Shaun Haney, joined by Peter with Pete Johnson. Pete, silage underway in Ontario, and it's early. You know, if you compare it to maybe what we would call an average start to silage season, we got to be careful. We don't follow that calendar too closely, because if we wait for the calendar to tell us when we should go, we may be too dry this year.
Yeah, 100%. So lots of things going on, right, Shaun? First off, we're about 150 crop heat units ahead of the 10-year average. So that's a week ahead of the 10-year average. And of course, that starts May 1st. So you got to be really careful to begin with. If I planted corn on May the 4th, I'm ahead a week. If I didn't plant corn till June the 1st, I'm actually not ahead at all, because almost all of the gain we had was in May. June, July, and August have been more or less normal. So, you know, planting date is really having an impact on how far ahead I am. But yeah, if you're like, some growers are actually saying 10 days ahead of normal. And if you're 10 days ahead of normal and,
wow,
you know, you can lose 0.5% moisture per day. In fact, if it's dry and sunny, good conditions, you can lose maybe even more than that. And if you're aiming for whatever the number is, 65% moisture, and you are 10 days late, now you're at 55% moisture, you can have some real problems. So pay attention. Don't forget as well that tar spot, if you do have tar spot, or northern corn leaf blight is out there as well, it does reduce the moisture in the leaves. The leaves will look pretty dead, but don't go by that, because the leaf material is only at most 15% of the weight of the silage. And so the silage moisture is really driven by the cob moisture and the stalk moisture, and cob moisture more than anything. So, you know, it comes back to basics. Look at the milk line in the kernel. It's got to be at least half milk line, at least, before you're going to be in the game. And 2/3, 3/4 milk line, pretty common. The other thing I will say, Shaun, is, you know, you asked a bit about where we were at from a farmer sentiment standpoint.
Yep.
Man, so far, like the early silage yields, they are mediocre. They're not horrible, but they're just average at best. And so not really the excitement that we would like to have in terms of corn yield so far from a silage perspective.
Hear about that at the dairy tent over there at Canada's Outdoor Farm Show. We wanted to also talk about edible beans. Give us an update there.
Yeah, so their harvest has started, and actually it's really going to go full speed this week. So a lot of the early edible beans, the cranberry beans, the early seeded edible beans, we got some burn down applied late last week. One of the real challenges is variability in the crop. And so I don't know there's no easy call. That's what I'm doing today, Shaun, is I'm scouting fields, edible bean fields, for burn down. And it's such a dog's breakfast in the area that I work in, because we've had water sit in areas. There's dead areas, you know, around that wet spot. You've got whatever 30, 40, 50, 100 feet of delayed maturity. You get into the good part of the field and they're getting, in some cases, almost overripe, or if we wait for the delayed areas, they're going to get overripe. They can split pods. So it's a really tough call, and every grower is going to have to make that. Like, you really aim for 90% of the field to be ready, but whenever you make the call, just remember, most of us now are using Aragon as the burn down, and so there's a new registration with Aragon where we are up to 0.8 of a liter, 0.8 liters per acre of merge with the Aragon, and so that surfactant will help in terms, because if you have green areas in the field that aren't any too ready, you really got to work hard to get those leaves off the plant so you don't stain the edible beans. And the other real comment from the best growers, and your Western farmers are going to roll their eyes, man, but 30 gallons of water per acre with the Aragon and spray between the hours of 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. on a sunny, warm day, and you will get great activity on the Aragon. If you use 20 gallons, which is sort of what we used to say, and you spray at 9 a.m. or at 8 p.m. at night, you might be waiting 21 days to take those edible beans off. Like the difference in efficacy is unbelievable, just unbelievable.
30 gallons. That water truck never stops.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Fortunately, edible beans are generally speaking a smaller acreage crop. It's not like you're trying to spray 10,000 acres of edible beans all on the same day. But, it makes a huge difference, man.
One of the other things that happens in the fall time in livestock areas, I know, where I grew up in southern Alberta, this definitely was an activity, was getting that fall manure out. It happens really across Canada in a whole bunch of different parts. Things we got to think about.
Yeah, so really great question, Shaun. And I've had tons of questions. I talked a little bit about this on Wheat Pete's Word last Wednesday, and immediately I got 5 or 6 text messages saying, I don't agree, Pete, I don't agree. So we really do start talking about growers looking at putting manure on ahead of winter canola, ahead of winter barley, ahead of winter wheat. And so the typical question, Shaun, is 3,000 gallons of finishing hog manure. That's like it could be as much as 150 pounds of nitrogen. It's probably at least 100 pounds of nitrogen. I plant winter barley early because I need to. If I plant it, we talked already, if I plant it 14 days ahead of the optimum date for winter wheat, it's already in the ground. This week, we're going to have 25-degree temperatures. It looks like the 14-day forecast is all these gorgeous mid-20 temperatures. Yeah. I get 100 or 150 pounds of nitrogen on that winter barley crop. It's going to go nuts. If it goes nuts, I'm going to get fall disease. I love manure. I think it's fine on winter canola because winter canola needs the boost. But on winter barley, I really think you got to pull the rate back, like not more than 30 pounds of nitrogen, 50 at the most, or you're just going to get into situations where you may well get fall disease. On winter wheat, same thing. If you're planting early, you start planting winter wheat later, and fall manure is a big boost. I think of Jason Mock, who injects hog manure underneath the row where he's going to plant his twin rows of winter wheat and then plant soybeans in between. And he always gets great winter wheat yields. Well, it's because he plants late, but he plants late with that concentrated manure zone there, and it really gives them this big boost whenever they get a chance to grow.
Makes sense. And if it's a spring planted or seeded crop that you're going to be doing on that land, let her go. Just spread. Yeah, spread. Although with dry manure, the earlier you put it on, the better, because it's got a high carbon nitrogen ratio. With liquid manure, the later you apply it, the better, because the low carbon to nitrogen ratio, if you put it on early, you'll lose a ton of nitrogen. If you can wait and put it on just before freeze up, you'll actually save a lot more nitrogen. And again, this is one of those activities where there's a cost-benefit ratio, because sort of like our silage discussion a few weeks ago, there's no way to avoid things like compaction when we're spreading manure. So it's the benefit of the manure greater than the disadvantages of possible compaction that we're creating, correct? Yeah, absolutely. And if the soil is dry and I'm a liquid manure guy, but it's still early, do I lose the nitrogen and not compact the soil and just go do it? Or do I wait and hope it doesn't get too wet and I cause compaction later in the year and save the nitrogen? Hey, Pete, thanks a lot for joining us. Really appreciate it. Hey, Shaun, I always love talking with you, man. Have a great week. Yeah, Pete's in his pickup truck. I'm in the Calgary airport. We are just a show on the road this week. If you have any feedback, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Or, of course, you can call the Real Ag feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio. We'll, of course, chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode, brought to you by Brett Young. Check out their new BY7204LL canola with Pod Defender shatter tolerance and Defender rated club root protection. Talk to your local retailer today.